Just a quick intro about me. Pretty much spent most of my career in the oil and gas sector. Started in plant floor as a instrumentation electrical technician, moved on up through automation, and then into security, of course. Over that time, picked up a couple certifications along the way. Recently graduated from the master's in science from Sands Technology Institute, and also involved with the ICS 612 course and teaching that. So with that, I'll kick it over to my colleague, Josh.
Hey everyone, Josh Carlson here, Senior Business Development Manager here at Dragos. I handle a lot of our partner relationships and excited to join you today and give you some information on asset visibility that we've gathered over the years. I spent a lot of my time in the IT security field, got my start right around the Y2K good times, and have been working in the industrial control space for just over a decade now. I'm also the representative for Dragos on the ISA Global Security Alliance, Global Cybersecurity Alliance, where we're trying to kind of push how important cybersecurity is within the ICS and OT security for everybody that's out there, get the message out to everyone. And so first of all, I'd like to kind of start by setting the stage. The goal of this presentation, and really we're going to turn this into a webinar series, because we believe that there's just so much content that goes along this topic and really talks through the entire journey. So to start off today, we're going to give you what we believe is a proper perspective of asset visibility. What we want you to walk away with is the idea of this is how we want to consider and look at asset visibility overall. Then we're going to jump into how asset visibility helps in risk management, right? Everybody always hears that term risk management, and we're going to help you connect the dots, which in turn will hopefully help allocate management time and resources to say, hey, if we want to do risk management appropriately, this is what asset visibility means to us, and this is why it's important. And then we'll close things out today with where do I go from here? Once you've got some asset visibility items covered and well documented and processes and procedures in place, where do we go from here? And Mike's going to give us some really good tips on things that he has experience with. And ultimately the goal of transforming the challenge of asset visibility into a competitive advantage for your companies. So as we start off today, again, I think one of my favorite movies, Princess Bride. If you don't know it, this is a very famous meme out there where it keeps talking about, you keep using that word, and I don't think you know what it means, right? People use words, they use vocabulary, they use phrases, and sometimes it means different things to different people. And so we started off today saying asset visibility, and maybe some of you are not aware of what we mean by that. So I'm going to start with the first word. What is an asset? And if you come from the IT space, when I say the word asset, you may be thinking of laptops, desktops, firewalls, printers, everything that you are forced to go around and put one of those fun little asset tags on and catalog and capture. And you're not wrong. Those are assets. Those are assets for the company. They're assets that help your business do what it needs to do. But from an OT perspective or the industrial control space, what we do is we consider OT asset or an asset to be something that's significantly broader, that's significantly bigger than just those devices. And so while OT has a lot of those traditional IT systems and devices, it also has a lot of other non-traditional items too. And as we look at businesses who have been going through the digitization function for the past decade plus, and we now see them moving into this new word called digital transformation, continues to be adopted and is growing, especially with COVID and a lot of different things like that, forcing people to work remotely. Digital is obviously the wave of the future. And so we're seeing a lot more of remote connectivity, a lot more system support. And so the takeaway from this slide is what is an asset is in the OT world, or in the industrial control world, would more closely mirror the word enterprise from the IT world. And so again, not to try to create a division between IT and OT, but simply to say when we say the word asset, we are talking about something that encompasses the entire asset. So all of the different sites, all of the different plants, all of the different trains, all of the different processes and things that go in that, and also all of the systems that may exist outside of it, right? You hear sometimes now we're hearing that word system of systems. And so it's not just one control system or one SCADA system, it's all of the supporting infrastructure and systems and things that are going into that, and also where all of that data is being fed into. So now let's take a look at the word visibility. And here again, by definition, visibility is just simply the ability to see things or to look at things. Based on your role within the organization and your organization's maturity model, when you hear the word visibility, it could translate to a basic spreadsheet or a database of some kind that has a big listing of devices and systems and applications. And what can that level of visibility provide us? Well, again, a list of workstations and servers, hardware, operating systems, applications, network devices, all of that's really good stuff. Taking it one step further, we look at visibility from maybe you also are provided a physical network topology, a logical network topology that you got from an external vendor, or maybe you've built it internally, through an assessment time or something like that. And this level of visibility shows us everything is, how everything is connected together, how applications are supporting the system. And while this is really good, and a lot of times, unfortunately, a lot of times we find these to be static in nature. In other words, they're a snapshot in time. In our experiences here at Dragos and in my personal experiences over time, unless you have a very rigorous change control process in place, it may be several months or a year before any of this information is updated. And as a result, the level of visibility likely does not accurately reflect the state of your operation in the asset overall today, which inevitably leads to some challenges that Mike is going to be talking about here in just a little bit. As we look at this kind of the final bottom line here, right, the key takeaway from this slide is that when we talk about visibility, we need to strive for adequate and near real-time visibility, right? Not just a static data set. I mentioned digital transformation. As those initiatives continue to influence the direction of your business for tomorrow, we want to respect the fact that OT environments are part of a larger system of systems, right? So regardless of whether you're operating a small SCADA system with just a few PLCs, a large DCS, distributed control system with a safety instrumented system attached to it, you should be able to quickly answer the questions that are related to, what systems do I have? What devices do I have? What operating systems, firmware, things like that? What's their configuration? How are they physically and logically connected? Why are they communicating to each other? And maybe why did that change, right? If you don't have that level of visibility in your infrastructure today, then that's a challenge, again, that Mike will talk about here in a second. And you should look at fixing that before you look at anything else. And so lastly, from my perspective, as we look at the scope of asset visibility overall, right, as we kind of tie all this together, we often see organizations and even recommend organizations to break down their OT infrastructure into these zones and conduit models that Mike will talk about here in a little bit. So when you think of asset visibility, we want you to have an accurate view of every system, device, user, and the multitude of other things that exist and that are transmitting data throughout that entire environment, as well as anything that's connected from the outside. So, and the reason that I say that is because the chances are more likely that your operational environment is going to be experience some type of issue from a trusted remote connection, right? It's more likely that you're to experience downtime or a loss of productivity or something like that from some of those trusted systems, some of those enterprise type systems, than you are from a hacker, or some type of activity group from the outside. Which is why we're stressing the importance of having this type of robust visibility so that you can detect both sides, right? So a good start for this in your journey is at that immediate control system level. Now, I will say that if that's too much risk for your organization to accept right up front, kind of getting right to the core of the process control system itself, then flip the order, right? Start up at the top, which we level 3.5, or we labeled it as the DMZ in this diagram, right? So that kind of gives you a good. The next view is to then expand that, right? Start at one place and then start to expand. So your better look at the system itself is based upon having that operational level 3 coverage, and then item number 4 would be everything from that level 3.5 DMZ all the way down to your level 0 instrumentation. So again, kind of a good, better, and best view of the atmosphere itself and the environment that you're working within. So with that being said, wanted to do a quick poll just to gauge our audience here and see what you guys are who our audience is, and make sure we're all speaking the same language. So how would you rate your current OT asset visibility? Now that I've just spent the first few minutes kind of talking about it, where would you say that you would rate yourself? And the reason that, again, we think this is important is, do you have the ability to identify accurately, effectively, and adequately, right, how many PLC systems you have? If you see a vulnerability published tomorrow, right, how much time would be spent looking for that, how many PLCs I might have, many systems with that firmware version installed, or how many applications might be running that, and how critical are those to my infrastructure? So are you struggling with it? Have you kind of started on it and you're still working on it? You've been doing it for a while, or you're not really sure, or you've got a fully automated system. So fantastic. So taking a quick look at the results, looks like we're pretty top heavy. A lot of folks struggling with it. Good amount of folks have started on it, which is awesome. Love to hear that, and appreciate the fact that there's always room for improvement. So got a solid mixed bag here, Mike, with us today. So looking forward to it. Would love to speak to the any of the individuals that said we have a fully automated system. Would love to hear your feedback on this. So again, so now that we're all on the same page with what is asset visibility, and maybe more importantly, what it is not, I'd like to turn it over to Mike and let him talk about why it can be such a pain in the asset, yet essential for risk management and some other very important things to consider along this journey. So thank you, Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Josh, and awesome job getting us going this far. And that's good, interesting feedback as well from the community. Really appreciated that. And again, it really highlights that a lot of folks right now are currently, you see this as a problem, and you're making a lot of good inroads and strides. Kind of see that we kind of a normal curve around. Yes, we have an asset inventory, initiative kicked off, but we might not be there yet, and we might not have that visibility we fully need. And so, as we move on to the next section, kind of talk about where does this really fit in the maturity of our organization. And so, this is about, there's just a lot of conversations right now. I've had a lot of conversations in my career over, what should we be doing as a strategy, as a company? Where should we be, putting our money this year, next? And there's a lot of cool tools out there, a lot of EDR solutions. There's a lot of advanced or application level specific and OT protocol firewalls. You look around the environment, a lot of cool stuff going on out there. But the problem is when, just based on the feedback that we've just recently seen that you folks provided, that an asset inventory and yet moving into an asset visibility is still a challenge for most. And that's really where we need to be focusing on, and from my perspective, and that's really where you see, on the sliding scale of security. This is a kind of a image taken out of an awesome paper that Rob M. Lee wrote here a while back. So if you haven't read the paper, definitely want to recommend getting into the paper and those kind of things, because there's so much to get out of it. But asset visibility really does, it's not a advanced topic. It's a foundational thing that you need to be doing. And again, we'll talk about this a little bit more, but it's so much more than spreadsheets, and it's so much more than a static information. Because to understand your environment, to understand your risk, you really need to understand what your systems, what systems you have, what systems are communicating to each other in order to properly architect, to properly defend, put on those passive defenses, and to properly do active defense. So when we think about ongoing asset visibility, it's really far left. And so, so that's really kind of where we're beginning at, and just kind of wanted to set the stage of where is this? This is not an advanced topic. This is foundational level activities. In the next slide here, we began to look into, Why do we really need a mature visibility? So a lot of times, and again, and that's why I'm really glad that Josh touched on, what is asset inventory and visibility. Those two words get mixed up a lot, and a lot of times we begin to think of, first of all, we need to identify our systems, and so you start down this journey with a spreadsheet or a database or whatever tool you're doing to collect that data. And then you begin to identify that, so I've got the static information out there. And now that requires a manual method of keeping it up. So there's got to be really, really tight change processes in place in order to keep this up. But that still doesn't tell me from an immediate perspective what devices are connected to who, what versions of protocols are really running out in the environment. You just took a snapshot and took a picture of your environment. As we look into the next phase of this, we begin to, the kind of that next step is to understand, okay, now I've got these assets out there, and now I can begin to identify what they're communicating to. Now, this is that next step where you may have ran some tools in your environment, collected this information back, but you still don't really have a good understanding of how your network actually works. You have just captured a lot of traffic, or you've drawn these lines on a diagram, and you can begin to understand how that fits in. As we advance our program and as we kind of move forward in that next step, we can kind of begin to understand, oh, that's how my environment really works. And so that's where my active defenses are in place. That's where my passive defenses are working or not working. For example, on the right-hand side of that last picture, you can see a direct connection from our range on out to an external network, and not totally bypassing a DMZ. We wouldn't have known that if we would have had a spreadsheet. We might have picked it up on that former image, but now that we began to lay out our architecture, we begin to identify those real-time systems, the real-time communications. We can now identify where we may have gaps and those kind of things in your environment. Now, kind of going on to a next topic here is getting into around standards and regulations. And this is another important thing because so many of us, depending upon what vertical we're in, we may be, subject to, different standards and regulations. So, for instance, those who are trying to adopt IEC 62443, you're probably very, very familiar with the topic or the idea of zones and conduits. Now, a zone is a logical grouping of systems, and normally it's a grouping of systems with a certain level of trust. So that those systems will be, they could be in a certain Purdue level. They could have a certain protocol around them. No matter what, they're in a certain level of trust. Now, as you begin to segment those systems around, if you don't understand exactly what's going on underneath, you can't properly do segmentation. You can't properly group those systems. So being able to actually understand what's happening in your environment from a communication perspective is actually, kind of that first process of doing proper architecture. As we look at the NIST cybersecurity framework, the first element of the cybersecurity framework, of course, is to identify your systems. So if you're even trying to follow that kind of the standard or that framework methodology, you have to know your systems very well. You have to identify what is out there and those kind of things. From another perspective, the SANS top, the top 20, or now it's the Center for Internet Security Controls. If you look into those, if somebody is kind of going down the more controls type program methodology, control number one is inventory and control of your hardware assets. Control number two is inventory and control of your software, deployment and what is actually out there and those kind of things. So on those, the first two things you need to do is understand what you have and what from a hardware perspective, and then also from a software perspective. And again, doing that via spreadsheets is very, very challenging. And again, it doesn't quite even get into that visibility perspective. If we even look at NERC CIP, so of course, a lot of times you think of NERC CIP, electrical sector in the U.S., but it's more than that. It's America's region, and there's other parts of the world that have begun to adopt this, adopt the framework and the regulations. So when you get into that, it's all about properly identifying your bulk, the BES cyber systems. And so again, we begin with the identification and classification of our systems. And then we can draw, like electronic security perimeters around it. We can identify those cyber assets and protected cyber assets within those areas, and begin to create proper, again, architecture around it. And so we can begin to, implement some of those requirements of that regulation. But it all begins with identifying and knowing really well what you have, so you can put those controls in place. Now, proper this proper visibility also supports a lot of additional work efforts. And again, each one of these areas, and we'll be talking about some of these more in upcoming sessions, but each one of these areas really allows you to mature your program. And so one of the things is an architecture review, where you really look into your deployment, your network architecture, and to properly identify where things are done right, or maybe you have some gaps where you may be improper zoning and segmentation, improper firewall rules, those kind of things from an architecture's perspective. From incident response, having good visibility greatly drives and greatly improves incident response. So often our responders, the first thing that, when there's an OT incident that occurs, unfortunately our responders a lot of times will have to do this work up, front, right when they get to the site, or however that response is playing out. And so a lot of their efforts is actually understanding what's in the environment. It's doing, it's creating that asset visibility, and it takes a ton of time. So it's slowing down that incident response. So proper visibility greatly improves response time in an incident scenario. Also, we look at crown jewel analysis, understanding what system is critical to your environment. What is that one system or a system of systems that can take your plant down? And to be able to understand that, put the proper visibility in place, greatly allows you to to again properly defend those systems. And again, we get into collection management framework, one of my favorite topics, around logging and monitoring and setting up a framework for understanding visibility. Again, it all ties back to proper network visibility and those kind of things. And then of course we get into threat hunting, which we see around um, being able to identify bad behavior or threat actors in your environment. Again, building upon a proper inventory and visibility of your systems. Lifecycle management, all about understanding and knowing your systems, what's in place out there. You may be running, unaware you're running a Windows XP system or something like that, or you have an aging DCS or SCADA infrastructure, but that you may or may not be aware of. Again, having all this in place really helps with planning new projects and those kind of things down the road. And of course, hardening and security controls deployment. And another thing that I've seen really help is around SIM detection and enrichment, where you have if you have an alert come in on your SIM system from your SOC analyst, being able to side fill some of that rich information with that good asset visibility can greatly help drive that detection capabilities and drive the response capabilities. And so when we get into that, we begin to understand, with the proper visibility that we have in place, we begin to understand our systems a lot better. And each one of these areas is something that I've actually seen out in the wild, where and this really speaks to understanding your environment, understanding the risk of your systems and those kind of things. You may have from the top bullet, third party remote access. You may know it, you may not know it. And so you may see that vendor, you may not know that you have an external network coming in, in place, and those kind of things. So you have a connection coming in from the external network down the control zone. I've seen those many times where people weren't aware of that connection because they didn't have the proper visibility. Also, because of changes over time or poor infrastructure, you'll see an engineering workstation on the wrong area, even on the business network. So that's definitely a concern. Definitely, with that, you see connectivity into the environment due to, really openly permissive firewall rules, really leading to a lack of a DMZ, because a DMZ is just a bump in the wire. And then, of course, horizontal communication between zones. Now, this really builds upon, though, too, is that when things come up, such as I remember when when the WannaCry vulnerability hit, or that MS 1710, where when that hit, people began to ask that question: am I compromised? Where is SMB version 1 running? Do I have my systems patched? That drove a lot of organizations to quickly scurry and look into their environment, which they had no visibility, and try to pull this information out. I saw this again during with the threat actor group Xenotime, when they compromised the Saudi Arabia refinery on the safety systems, and where that safety controller, when that happened, it was the issue around properly identifying, do we have a safety controller in our systems? Could we be compromised the same way, and so forth. So just being able to answer those questions quickly, what I have, what it's connected to, and what it's communicating to, is huge when you look about threat management and vulnerability management in your environment. So where do we go from here? If you're just starting out, if you're one of the people that clicked on that, the first thing to say, we're just starting out in this effort, what do we do now? A couple things you can do right now that's free. So I like free options. So you can definitely run some different free, systems out there. Sophia is a great example of a system that is continuously on. You can deploy that and run it. That'll give you some decent detections. Again, it's free, so normally extra effort is put in on the analyst, or the technician, or the security specialist working in that on that tool, but that's a good first effort. You also have tools like Network Miner, and Network Miner can look through a PCAP, or you're pulling traffic off the wire. It can look through that, can tell you, if you're running vulnerable protocols, username and passwords in clear text, files being moved, and those kind of things. It's a great tool for just a quick snippet or a snapshot of the environment. Of course, anybody in security should know about Wireshark and probably have used it before once in their life. Again, a great tool for analyzing your environment. Again, it is only as good though as the protocol dissectors that it has. So if you have SIP protocol or Step 7 or Modbus in your environment, it'll be able to detect those. But other protocols your vendors may be using, it may not have those dissectors, and therefore it doesn't know what it is. So just be aware of that. Of course, T-Shark is a command line variant of Wireshark. I love T-Shark for scripting things out. And then TCP dump is a way you can actually script out, pulling information off the wire, and you can automate it out so you're continuously pulling that off. But again, these tools are really not for continuous monitoring. So when we look into that though, what do we really want from a continuous perspective? What are we actually looking for that proper visibility? Well, there's a lot of things that we can actually automate out. So we can automate out, from our device, what its MAC address is, its IP addresses, firmware, operating system, and those kind of things. Having that information right at your fingertips can again answer that question: do I have this system in my environment? Am I impacted by this latest threat? We can think of an unnamed security or a systems management company out there that does a lot of network management and systems management. Do you have that piece of software in your environment? Do you know what version it is that it's running, and those kind of things? So from that, which recently occurred, you could be able to pivot really quick in. Now, there's some things that you can also add to gain that visibility, and this really helps in just day-to-day operations and incident response, is around things like the backup frequency. So I know I have this device on the wire. How often is it backed up? Those kind of things. Who owns the device? So if the device is having problems, or if I get an error or a notification on it, who do I go contact to begin to work on that system? Where it says location. So where is this thing actually deployed? Out in the plant, out in the field, in my offshore platform, out in the substation, all those things. And then the function. So what function does this device have in the environment? Is it a relay? Is it a, is it part of my critical safety system, sys type control system? So all those things are really critical when you begin to, getting that great visibility. Now, some of these can be fully automated out, but you have to put rules around this, and some tools will actually do this. So they'll look at the ports and protocols that are being used, and from there they can kind of determine where it's at in your environment, what it's actually doing, and kind of define some of this out. But it requires back end logic in your systems. Now, when we really think of visibility, this is really that differentiation between the inventory, and now we're moving into more mature visibility. This is where we get into, again, the communication with systems and devices. This is where we really begin to understand what our systems are doing, what is talking to who, or what important protocol. And then we can actually get into things like service versions and those kind of things. So that's really when we can begin to get that from our device, we can really begin to understand our environment well. So one thing though to be aware of is that even though when we're doing these kind of things, when we're starting out on this journey, is even though this switch, the maybe a Cisco switch or a Hirschman or whatever, it may look like something that we would use in an IT environment. But the impact of that switch going offline, if you came up to the switch and wanted to configure a span port on that to collect information, if you did it wrong, if you overloaded the switch somehow or something like that, the impact of that device that looks very similar to an IT component could be completely different. So just be aware of that where we're going into is an operational environment. Operators run the show. So just be aware of that as we're going down this path to gain our visibility that we need, definitely need to be working with operations. It is again their systems. Definitely respect rules of engagement, of course. And I also know, a lot of times we think about, there's that conversation around, do I run passive tools or do I run active tools? Definitely that's up to your kind of level of risk in your environment. There's been a lot of good blogs with Dragos and that kind of stuff around this. You can go reference, but definitely recommend, if you are going to run active tools, you want to make sure that that we we are aware of what the tool can do, the impact of that tool. Definitely only use it on low impact systems, and definitely test. So one of the things though about about identifying devices and using these tools is you definitely want to make sure that you are aware that these devices are good at IT-ish type information, the free tools that I mentioned. But a lot of our DCSs and SCADA systems, they don't, they're challenging from the architecture perspective. And the reason why is because how they've been configured and deployed. They're set up very much for redundancy, for high availability, for security, and those kind of things. So you may come up to a DCS system that has multiple network cards, that has redundant cards, those kind of things. And from a network perspective, it's really challenging to understand what that device is doing, or how many devices are out there if you have a server with multiple network cards. So running free and open source tools, it's a great way of taking this information, but it's also challenging though to really understand your systems with them. So, like I said, if you have redundant paths, sometimes your IP address or MAC address can float between those redundant interfaces. Your MAC addresses may change if you're really utilizing that to tie a device to tie that MAC. Really using that or an IP address. If that changes, what impact does that have on your visibility? Also, we find a lot of our systems have infrequent communications. Sometimes a PLC or RTU, may struggle a little bit, or may not be pulled very often, or so forth. So if you're just taking a snapshot in time, you may actually not be able to identify that device is on the network. Now, on the next slide, we kind of get into around some of the importance of automated visibility. Now, one of the things that is really important to understand is that our OT environments change, and they actually change quite a bit. And so it's been my experience, in this environment that every few weeks almost, things would change. And what do I mean by change? Small projects. So you may have a new device being put in there in a portion of your network. You may have a new IO card being put in to expand some of your automation capability. A new analyzer may be getting installed for environmental regulations. A substation may be expanded, those kind of things. So even though our environment normally doesn't change quite like an IT environment does, absolutely it's changing all the time. And so, once again, relying on those manual processes is very challenging. And that's why, having that automated capability is so important. Now, when we look at what we really are looking for, what are the sources out there? There's a lot of them. So we can kind of think of, network security monitoring is absolutely an awesome source for this, but there are others. There's OT vendor solutions. We have, network management systems, endpoint security, and even backup solutions can actually all build up to this, collective, that's gold standard, if you will, of OT asset visibility. But really, driving for that real-time information, and that information that can be automated back out is key. So really, the next perspective is, where do we go from here? And this is where, once you get this information in your environment, you can do really cool things with it. Kind of like what we'll be talking about next is on, really around understanding our environment enough to do things like pivot path analysis. So, that's where we really begin to understand, what's going on in our environment. What is, what are those things that, with pivot path analysis, of course, it's all about, identifying your assets, looking at your actual topologies, and kind of like we talked about before, understanding how your network is broken out into zones and conduits. You kind of begin to identify your pivot points, what systems are communicating to who, and then you can begin to actually modify your environment in the passive, modify your passive defenses if you see a problem. And this is a really good exercise to do. If you if you have an evil bit, you turn it on, and you can kind of look at this from an attacker's lens, and really begin to understand how attacks work, and again begin to modify your environment, put in those proper defenses to properly understand your visibility and so forth. So with that, I will turn it over to Josh to wrap us up.
Awesome job, Mike. Thanks so much. Really appreciate you sharing all of your different experiences across your work there at Shell and some of the other organizations that you've been. I think hopefully this gives people a lot of good information on how do we start. Again, we saw more than 75% of our respondents and people participating today looking at, I'm struggling with it, or I'm just getting started in it. Where do I go? Saw lots of great questions thus far in the Q&A that we're going to hopefully get to in just a few minutes. So, key takeaways again, right? How do we look at visibility? Hopefully a key takeaway for you today, first and foremost, was why having a proper perspective of asset visibility is important. Right? We understand that it can be a pain in the asset, right? We understand that it is challenging to go out and get all of that information, whether you're talking automated, semi-automated, maybe you got to compare some manual components. And I really like that slide that kind of showed all the arrows from the different systems around the organization feeding into that one asset visibility system. Secondly, why it's important for your risk management. Again, risk management seems to be kind of the key word that I've heard so much over the last couple of years with regards to how much risk is my organization willing to tolerate? How much risk are they willing to accept? Is the juice worth the squeeze? I heard way too many times. It's a lot of money sometimes to implement these, to hire the people that know OT cybersecurity specifically. So what am I willing to accept? What am I willing to risk? And unfortunately, what we've seen, and Mike kind of alluded to this, is that a lot of times when you don't know what you don't know, then you really don't know how much risk you're accepting. And so that becomes a challenge in and of itself. And finally, we hope one of the key takeaways was that, some of the future milestones, once you've got a good or decent, acceptable level of asset visibility within your organization, you know what you should start looking at doing next. So those pivot path analysis, right? How can people navigate their ways through? We just did a talk not too long ago around using an ICS historian as a pivot path down into the industrial control system. And so if you missed that, there's things on dragos.com that you can go and see where we talk about that a little bit. And again, in our next series, we're going to do that. And ultimately, again, hopefully what we're looking for here is you guys to realize that there is a challenge around asset visibility. But hopefully when you get it right and you get it going in the right direction, it will become a competitive advantage for your organization. So a quick teaser here for the next upcoming. Again, we mentioned this is going to be a series, so we hope you come back and join us again. February 25th, we're going to focus on what matters, the collection management framework, the taxes before the axes, right? You got to know what you have, you got to know where it's at, you got to know what to focus on before you start going to work. So again, Mike talked about this a little bit at the beginning there. It makes sense to have defense in depth. It makes sense to have layers of security in front of you, but you got to know what you have. You got to know what's at risk, and some of the things that we're going to talk about, we'll focus on that. Again, with the collection management framework and the crown jewels analysis. And then looking forward into March, a look ahead. So how do we do these things within the Dragos platform? Some of you know Dragos because of our great research team, threat intelligence team. Some of you know us from, just out in the community doing services work and things like that. We also have a great platform that can help organizations with a lot of this. So we're going to be taking a look at version 1.7. Not going to make it a sales pitch, but what we are going to do is give you some good information on how you can use the Dragos platform to address the challenge of asset visibility, to leverage it in your content management framework or crown jewel analysis, and how we can help it, again, give your company that competitive edge that they're looking for. So with that, thank you again for joining us. We're going to jump right into the Q&A session, and I'm going to let Linda fire away.
Nicely done. Thank you, my friends. So we have gotten a number of questions. Let's get to them. So the first one, we're only using manual methods to keep track of our inventory. What's the first step to automate our inventory and get that visibility that you mentioned? Josh?
Mike, you want to address that, or you want me to take it?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and take it, Josh. Thanks. I really think it's there's always a pathway into anything. And so start what is easiest for you. Start with where your collection points and those kind of things. So what we're really alluding to in our talk here is visibility. It's not just, in inventory. So it's first of all, a lot of times it's a boots on the ground approach to look at your plant, look at your infrastructure, look at your network topology, and how things are laid out. And from there, you can begin to take those snapshots using the free tools that we mentioned and begin to understand from a snapshot point of view how your systems are communicating and so forth, and begin to walk down that path again of going, okay, now how can I move down from taking a snapshot and putting something in real time. And so that's really where that you want to be driving for, is that real time platform.
Okay, thanks. Next question. We're using some vulnerability scanning tools. Why isn't that enough?
I'll take this one, and I think it goes to a couple other questions that I see in here around, free tools, commercial tools have been around for a long time. You may be using some of them. I think one of the challenges that vulnerability management or asset discovery solutions do is that they continue to just give you that snapshot in time. There's nothing that really focuses on how do I see a trend. So imagine, if you will, taking a historian and saying that you only get the snapshot of what you did yesterday and what you did today. The power of a historian is being able to predict how your system is working over a period of time. And so that's where I think the vulnerability solutions and some of the other tools that are out there today, they give you a consistent point in time snapshot, but they don't actually tell you trending over time what that looks like. The other thing that I think some vulnerability solutions and asset discovery solutions can miss is you assign them a range, right? So we kind of showed that topology or that scope where it's how many networks do I point it at? How many systems am I going to capture? Where am I scanning? The visibility of that it can become very limited, or can become siloed or isolated to only this specific section of the plant or only this specific section of the operational environment. It doesn't really give you that holistic view. And you're also missing a critical piece that Mike talked about, and that's the communication. So yes, it's one thing to understand where assets are, what their firmware versions are, do we have vulnerabilities or applications, but you completely miss the idea of how those systems are interacting and communicating to one another. And that's oftentimes where we see that dwell time or the adversary or an open port or a misconfiguration existent within an environment for such a long time.
Great, Josh. Thank you. What's the best way to get management support for this kind of visibility tool?
Mike, you've probably addressed that challenge once or twice.
Absolutely. So when you get the visibility like this, it really helps a lot of different workflows. So, from a, audit perspective or something like that, where, and instead of all this manual method of trying to keep all this information up, it's a huge amount of work. You can, you're looking at automating things out. So again, any tool you introduce in your environment, there's tool upkeep. That's fine. But when you can kind of get this visibility, so it's more, you're automatically keeping things up to date. Now your drawings and those kind of things are up to date. You're understanding your environment at real time. So so that's one perspective. The other perspective again is this, and it's really hard to put a dollar value on it. But again, to that real time response, knowing our systems, what's going on in our systems. One of the things that I found quickly, by putting visibility in our environment, again, not from a security perspective, but understanding, where, for instance, where there's too many OPC connections into a DCS server, to understand those connections, and we were able to find some configuration errors and those kind of things that were very positively impactful once we corrected the environment to the operation, the availability of the system. So, not even from a scary perspective, but just knowing what's going on is huge, and that's a really good selling point actually. So,
and I would just add to that kind of that true risk, right?
Yes.
One small story I'll share is that we were out doing an assessment for an organization, and one of the things that we found when demoing and kind of piloting a proof of concept with the Dragos platform was that it highlighted where different connection points were at, and come to find out that by mistake, like Mike just said, a configuration whoops was that the remote control system was connected to the guest wireless access. And so anybody who came into the facility and was permitted to log into the guest wireless access point could have mistakenly hit an IP address, which would have given them control to the or at least access, right, to the control system. And if they knew the default username and password for that particular control system, they could have logged right in and seen full displays. And so again, I think there's validity and being able to see the true risk of where things are connected, how those systems are interacting with one another, and being able to detect in real time when that changes might be a turnaround, might be a mistake by a contractor. You just never know. And so having that real-time visibility can sometimes help management open their eyes a little bit and go, wow, yeah, we really need something like that.
Absolutely. Okay, next question. How do you capture analog devices that connect to an analog to digital converter before connecting to a network?
So I'll start here, Mike, and then pass it over to you, because I'm sure you've got a little bit of experience with some analog stuff, been doing this for 20 years. One of the things, obviously, so analog, right? Systems or devices that are not communicating over your traditional Ethernet networks. And it's important from my perspective, or the ways that I've seen this work, is that you start looking at the integration, right? Increase your integration capability. So that OT visibility platform that you're looking at needs to have some way to integrate with, and more likely than not, it's going to be some type of OEM network management system that gives you that. So a couple things that can help, right? First and foremost, import, right? Import a list of assets and attributes of those assets in a static fashion, at least puts that device inside your bigger asset visibility platform, right? And then secondly, if you have some type of OEM solution or something like that that can integrate where it's out capturing the 4 to 20 milliamp signals and pulling that information across, you can at least get some information that that device is still alive, that it's still working, that it's still communicating, and you might have, again, some information there. So again, analog can't really do much from the Ethernet side of things, but certainly from an integration point of view, as well as a static import capability, become two very important characteristics to start that journey. Anything else, Mike?
Yeah, definitely. And also add on, there's a lot of things around, when you look in these systems, you have a lot of times remote IO and those kind of things. So even though from a, when we're thinking about these communications going on, these protocols going across the wire, you hit an analog device, there's not a whole lot of protocols going on there other than a 4 to 20 milliamp loop. But there are certain spots in the network to be able to identify that communication if you have the device put in that area. And definitely kind of backing up what Josh said is around integration. So there's a lot of systems out there that actually they'll do configuration changes and monitoring of your instrumentation systems, if that is a concern. So it's integrating actually into those systems and getting that rich information out. So, when you think of that, there's quite a bit of things out there. And also begin to think about, if you look at a lot of your instrumentation, a lot of flow meters and those kind of things are actually coming with an Ethernet cable. So a lot of and your analyzers are as well. So there's a lot of instrumentation that's converting over from 4 to 20 and moving right into, Ethernet or Profinet or whatever ports that they have to connect back to the plant floor. So that you also see kind of a migration of some of your quote unquote smarter instruments migrating over to an Ethernet cable. So
digitization.
Absolutely.
Next question. How does this visibility scope diagram relate to the traditional Purdue model?
So great question. And I'll jump in here again to start because I got a couple of things. I've been thinking about this one for a little bit, Mike, and again, hand it over to you. So when you look at the Purdue model, oftentimes people think of it as or kind of traditional thought was this is an implementation model, and that's not the case. Mike did a really great job of explaining levels of trust. So every zone, right, level 0, level 1, 2, 3, etc., is identified, and then what goes inside of that zone or what goes inside of that area is all of the devices, the applications, the systems that you agree are the same level of trust. So you might have several systems that are doing workstations, directly to some of the control processors that are talking directly to the field IO and things like that, right? Those would all probably exist within the same level of trust. You trust all of those assets to work and communicate to one another. Doesn't mean you don't monitor it. It just means that you trust them. And then anything that exists outside of that. So like, hey, maybe I need to patch those systems. I need to do some security monitoring of those systems. That's where you grow and you establish a conduit of communication, right? Again, this is not meant to be a hard and fast implementation model, like you have to do these concentric circles or this stacked layer of implementation. But you should have, this is an identified zone, right? I trust all of the devices inside of this zone to work together, to play nicely together. And then I create a conduit, I create a barrier around that zone. And then I create a conduit for things to communicate inside and outside of that zone. One of the other things that I saw a question come up here related to this is, OT networks are often segregated for security reasons. How do we communicate inside and outside of those security zones? So this kind of falls in that same line, right? Get your asset visibility, whether that's a sensor, whether that's a system, whether that's an application, get it inside of that zone, create a conduit for that sensor or that system to communicate from inside that trusted zone to the less trusted zone. And again, whether you want to use that as a data diode, like I saw somebody ask a question about how do data diodes work and things like that, you can use that. Becomes a very hard line in the security structure there. But again, I think examining this as a level of trust within each of the zones creating those conduits for applications and systems to communicate up and down as necessary gives you a really good snapshot of where your visibility is at, and make sure that you're not missing any gaps, or that you don't have any gaps, sorry, that you're not missing anything. Mike?
No, that's great. The only thing I'd add to that, really is when you think about it, because a lot of people in the past have thought about these different models and kind of gotten them confused. Purdue models is a timing model. It's a timing model between real time and less real time, the further you go away from the plant floor or that in-field device. So never think of the Purdue model is a network architecture. It's a timing model, and it also represents, again, those systems, those functional systems. And then again, you apply security controls, like Josh was just saying, with levels of trust around those similar types of systems, and you apply same types of controls because they can trust each other. They may be able to talk to each other, but then to talk out to somewhere else, then you need to pivot that through a conduit, control that, monitor that, and those kind of things. So yeah, so we always use the Purdue model because it's a nice way of breaking things down, like the OSI model, from a networking perspective. But in actuality, how you actually architect out, how you actually secure that, how you monitor it, and how you get that great rich asset visibility is not exactly through the clear cut 0 to 3.5 layers. So anyway,
I think we have time for one more question. And here it is. Can you talk a little bit about the maturity of this initial data collection of asset inventory? Is this a physical walk down of the environment, or is there some type of map equivalent?
So I was thinking about this one, and to me, what I've seen work well in the past, and only work well in the past because this is the way that I did it, but I'll share my experience, and Mike, I'm sure, has some great experiences too. What we did is we started with a data gathering exercise, basically understand what we already have, what was provided to us by our OEM vendors, what was provided to us by our system integrators, right? All of kind of the lists and the documents and the databases of things. And then we started using an automated process, right? Going out and discovering and putting the sensors on the network and getting all of the information to come back in. And then, once that activity had started, we started to compare notes. And the task was, let's compare what these asset visibility solutions are seeing, what they're actually reporting back into the dashboards and into the graphical interface diagrams and things like that, versus things that we know that should exist, right? So kind of talking a little bit to that analog versus digital, right? Zones and conduits, what can we see? What can we not see? Maybe we need to adjust where the sensors exist. And anytime that we found something that was not there, right, in either case, right, we see an asset appearing on our automated kind of detection system, and the sensors that were telling us from a passive perspective, this is the assets that exist in our environment, and we didn't have that on our list, right? That was like a immediate flag. That was an area of focus and investigation. And same thing the other way around, right? If we had something in our static list, in our static database that we knew should have been or was supposed to have been provided by our OEM and by our system integrator, and went to and tried to find it in that automated system, right? So then we started to compare notes. Once we got those things figured out, we adjusted where the sensors were sitting, we adjusted where the systems had that visibility into. The trust between our operational network, between our IT network, and overall risk management team that said, hey, we really trust this system in doing what it's supposed to be doing, not just gathering a snapshot in time, but truly capturing all the information that we were looking for. That's how the journey worked well for us. Start with the standard static stuff we know about, put some tools in place, calculate exactly where we want to start, and then work our way out from there. Seemed to work really well for us. How about you, Mike?
Yeah, actually very, very similar stories, because I've done this in multiple locations where, you start with the spreadsheets and your database of information, and you go out and you begin to validate. One of the things I'll highlight quickly here is it's really important to know how some of your vendor systems actually work, because that's really where you can kind of pinpoint the location of to go look into the network environment to be able to pull that traffic out. If you have some higher level perspectives of how the server is talking to these devices and so forth, don't need to know that. from a deep level, but it's really nice to know the overall hierarchy of communication. But indeed, I've deployed these things multiple different times, and you do quickly identify that what you thought you had from your manual methods, manual processes, was lacking. And you begin to identify devices on the wrong network, and you begin to understand that your architecture is different than what you really thought it was, and those kind of things. So it's really helpful to again start with what you have, put something in your environment, and then begin to that diff and compare and take notes. So yeah.
Okay, thanks everyone, our speakers, our audience. We hope to see you on our next one. Bye-bye. Have a nice day.